Okay, so today we're going to dive into a really fascinating and I think pretty radical blueprint for national survival. It's called the Aquarian Shift. And the core idea here is that a nation's true strength, well, it isn't about bigger armies or taller walls. It's about fundamentally rewiring how the most critical parts of a country actually talk to each other.
And it all starts with this one central question. What if the very walls you build for protection are actually your greatest weakness? I mean, it sounds like a paradox, right? We build walls, we separate our institutions, all to make them stronger. But in the world we live in today, a hyper-connected world, what if that very separation is what makes a nation fragile and dangerously slow?
The source document we're looking at has a great name for this outdated approach. It calls it the fortress mindset. It's this way of thinking that was really forged in the 20th century, but now, well, it's cracking under the pressure of 21st century problems.
So what is this mindset really? Well, imagine every single part of a government, health, agriculture, defense, as its own isolated castle. It's got high walls, a deep moat around it, they hoard their information, they don't talk to their neighbors, and they genuinely believe their strength comes from being completely independent.
And this is where you see the dangerous mismatch. On one side, you've got this slow, siloed fortress, but on the other side, you have the reality of our world, where a climate event can spiral into an economic crisis that then becomes a security threat, all in the blink of an eye. The fortress, well, it's just too slow to keep up.
And look, this isn't just some abstract high-level strategy problem. When these silos fail to connect, the consequences are measured in human lives and livelihoods. The cost of this disconnection is absolutely, devastatingly high.
Let's just take the catastrophic floods in Pakistan in 2010 and 2022. The data on rising river levels, it existed. The warnings were right there. But the agency with the data was in a totally separate castle from the people on the ground, so the message, it never arrived. This wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a connectivity disaster.
Or think about this paradox. It's kind of wild. One part of the country has more than enough grain, while another is facing critical shortages. Now, in a connected system, that grain would just move. It's logical. But in a fortress state, the data is trapped. And the result? You get artificial scarcity, price spikes, all because the right hand has no idea what the left hand has.
And maybe the most insidious failure is what the source calls the silent breakdown. You have government planners using year-old data to fund schools that literally don't exist anymore for students who are long gone. It's a perfect, if chilling, illustration of how a disconnected state becomes completely detached from reality, constantly trying to solve yesterday's problems.
Okay, so if the fortress is failing, what's the alternative? And this brings us to the solution on the table, the Aquarian Shift. The document presents it as nothing less than a new field manual for national survival in this complex, modern era.
And the change in philosophy here is huge. The old goal was all about protection, right? Resisting change by just building higher and higher walls. But the new goal is resilience, the ability to adapt and actually flow with change by building these flexible, adaptive networks. It's a massive shift from centralized control to distributed coordination. And this isn't just theory. This was born from direct, hard-won experience in a UN peacekeeping mission in Sudan. There, the military just couldn't operate in its own silo. It was impossible. If they didn't share critical security data with the food agencies, people would starve. In that kind of high-stakes environment, the lesson was brutally simple. Connection is survival.
Okay, so how do you actually build this network nation? The Aquarian Doctrine lays out a really clear blueprint that's built on 4 concrete pillars, all designed to systematically tear down those fortress walls.
So, let's walk through them. We're going to look at creating a national data exchange, implementing a twin port strategy, building something called hydrological resilience, and then establishing these things called fusion centers.
The first pillar is the absolute foundation for everything else, the National Data Exchange, or NDE. The best way to think of it is as a digital nervous system for the entire country. And listen, it's not about creating one giant vulnerable database. It's about creating a common language, a set of rules that allows all these different systems to finally talk to each other in real time.
And the practical difference this makes is just staggering. With an NDE, disaster management shifts from slow, manual reaction to actually pre-positioning relief before disaster strikes. Food security moves from pure guesswork to having real-time visibility of national stocks. The state basically stops being reactive and starts becoming anticipatory. All right, next up is Pillar 2. This is about applying that same network thinking to the economy.
It means you stop seeing the nation's two major ports, in this case Karachi and Gwadar, as competitors who are fighting over the same cargo. Instead, you start seeing them as two essential nodes in a single interconnected economic system.
So you give each port a specialized role, and this is the key part, you connect them with a high-speed logistics lattice. And what's the result? You create redundancy. You build resilience. If one port gets knocked out by a storm or some kind of blockade, the entire national supply chain doesn't just collapse. That is logistical strategic depth.
Pillar 3 tackles the most existential variable there is: water. For a country like Pakistan, water security isn't just an issue, it's the absolute substrate of survival. And the old fortress model of just building a few giant megadams, well, it's become far too slow and way too risky.
So the Aquarian shift proposes moving from this mega dam fortress concept to a distributed water network. Instead of having a few massive centralized points of failure, you build a whole mesh of hundreds of smaller dams. This is way better for mitigating floods, and crucially, by feeding all that flow data into the National Data Exchange, you create transparency and you build trust between provinces.
And that brings us to the final pillar. This one addresses the really messy hybrid nature of modern threats. A flood isn't just a water problem anymore. It quickly becomes a humanitarian crisis, which then turns into a security crisis. The old siloed response just can't handle this kind of convergence. So the response itself has to be fused.
The solution here is to create what are called fusion centers. It's where you put everyone, military planners, civilian experts, climate scientists, all in the same room, looking at the same data, creating a common operating picture. This breaks down the biggest walls of all, and it allows the entire system to see the whole threat and finally act as one.
So, you see, ultimately, this isn't just another policy proposal. It's really presenting an urgent choice between two possible futures. You either remain a brittle collection of isolated fortresses, or you rewire to become a resilient, adaptive network that's fit for the future. The core idea really concludes with this powerful thought. A nation's destiny in the 21st century is not going to be determined by the strength of its walls, but by the strength of the networks that hold it together.
And that really leaves us with one last question to think about, and not just for Pakistan, but for any country. In this world of complex, interconnected crises, where does the greatest danger really lie? Is it from threats outside our borders, or is it from our own failure to connect within them?